Hey everyone, and welcome to lesson 5 in my intermediate piano course. Hopefully you've all enjoyed working on the Mozart minuet that we learned in lesson 4. Keep practicing that piece if it's not quite there yet, okay? And I also hope you've been working really hard on your scales and broken chord exercises. Now in today's tutorial we don't have any new scales to learn, but we do have a new piece for you to work on, which we'll come to in a minute. As always, remember you can find all of the bits and pieces you need to back up this lesson, including the score for the piece we're going to work on, in the accompanying PDF. You can download that PDF entirely for free at buildspianopages.com/intermediate. You'll also find that link in the description text below this video. Okay, so let's have a look at and listen to this piece. It's the first movement of a Sonatina, which is kind of a short version of a sonata, and it's by a chap called Clementi, who was an Italian, a contemporary of Mozart, who spent most of his professional life based in London, and who actually got quite rich running a piano factory in London. Quite an interesting guy, as it happens. But that's a different story. Let's go through the piece. I'll play it through like I usually do with the score on screen. It's not really long, so I won't bother playing the repeats. We'll just play straight through it and then talk about what's going on. Here we go. Okay, so what do you need to know to start playing this piece for yourself? First of all, let's have a quick look at the fundamentals. We're in the key of C major and we're mostly playing white notes. Okay, we've got one or two accidentals. Every now and then an F sharp or an E flat crops up, but most of the time we're on the white notes, so that's pretty straightforward. Similarly, the time signature, this /C at the start tells us we are in 2/2 time. We have 2 beats per bar, 2 beats per measure, and each of those beats is a minim or a half note in length. Let's just count the first few bars. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, Clementi could have scored this in 4/4 time, but the fact it's in 2/2 tells us something. In this context, 2/2 says to us that we want to be taking this at a reasonable speed, okay, and Clementi's spiritoso marking, spiritedly, backs that up. And it also tells us that although we want to be precise, it also kind of wants to have a lightness and a grace about it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And 4/4 time would have a different feel. It would be much more kind of march-like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you first start playing this slowly, you might find it helpful to count it as if it were in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or even better, you can keep the 2/2 by counting 1 and 2 and like this. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and... Yeah, a really helpful thing to do. But once you're playing up to speed, I want to be able to hear that 2/2 kind of feel. That tells us several things about the piece. In particular, it tells us about the tempo we should be aiming for. Clementi tells us we're in 2/2 time and that we should play it spiritoso, spiritedly. Now, I've suggested that that means a tempo of around about 70 of those half note beats per minute, okay? Though there's a fair amount of leeway. When I played through, I think I might have gone a bit quicker than that. I wasn't measuring it against the metronome. Equally, you could go a bit slower. But don't be satisfied with a tempo that is too slow here, because if you played this piece too slowly, it would just die. Yeah, it needs to be played at a reasonable speed. It sounds kind of flashy, but it's not actually that difficult in terms of the finger dexterity you're using. Okay, to actually play the notes in this piece is not that difficult. Certainly if you think about the Mozart we learned in the previous tutorial, really it's a bit easier than that, if anything. We don't have any of the fancy twiddles in the right hand that we had in the Mozart. But what will really test you here is the fact that this piece demands precision. This is a piece that is often set in piano lessons, and that is because it's full of little elephant traps for unwary learners, okay? And most of those are to do with precision and the way your hands work together. To show you what I mean, and this is really important, this stuff lies at the heart of pulling out a good performance of this piece. To show you what I mean, let's just look at those first 4 bars again. In the right hand, we've got this really straightforward melody. There's a little bit of fancy messing about with your fingers, there's a little bit of staccato and phrasing and so on. We'll look at those in a second, but mostly it's quite straightforward. And the left hand looks even easier. For the first 3 bars, we've just got this lonely C all by itself. Okay, now the challenge here is to make sure that as well as playing the notes accurately, you're also playing the rests accurately. If you look at this piece, you will see it is full of rests and you have to respect them very precisely. If I played those first few bars, and if I were a little bit lazy in my left hand, pulling off that C, or letting it ring longer than it needed to, it would start to sound sloppy. That C has to come off at the same time as the C in the right hand, in looking at the first bar here, because it's the same length. So the rest has to start exactly where it says. And you get situations like that in both left and right hand. So if you look at the end of bar 4, that G in the right hand of bar 4 sounds for the G and the F in the right hand, but then has to come off before the E is played. Okay? Now, respecting those rests and playing it accurately at speed is not quite as easy as you think. In fact, it's extremely difficult and very difficult to get perfect. If you look through my performance, I dare say you will find 1 or 2 places where I wasn't absolutely dead on. But working on it will really help your precision and the way your 2 hands work together. Now, a simple thing you can do to really help yourself with the accuracy is to get a pencil, print off your score and mark in those tricky little bits, especially the rests that you might be missing, okay? So when you come across a place like there at the end of bar 4 and you notice your finger is sticking just a little bit too long to that G, circle the rest or box out the rests just to remind yourself that they're there. You probably won't need to do it in every bar, but as you identify places where you're not getting that kind of timing right, just put in some kind of mark. Another thing you can do is a pencil line like that to remind yourself that those 2 notes are played together, but then that one comes off. That kind of marking is really handy. Yes, you can do it on an iPad or similar tablet. I've got an iPad, I do this sometimes, but honestly I find pencil and paper much more instinctive and much easier and quicker. You can scroll things really easily, it's much more accurate and so on, and also it's really cheap, okay? So I would really recommend getting into the habit of marking up your scores. It's not just that kind of thing you can put in, fingerings and stuff that you decide to change or edit or add for yourself, extra markings. It's really useful. All good piano players do this, okay? So from this lesson onwards, if you're not in the habit already, get in the habit of printing off your score and marking it up. So that's some of the big picture stuff covered off. Now let's think about how we can approach this kind of step by step. What I would do to start with is just focus on the first half of the piece up to the first repeat mark at the end of bar 15 and take it separate hands to start with. This is a piece that will really benefit if you do a little bit of kind of work in the separate hands trenches, as it were, before you put the hands together. In the right hand, the fingering is pretty straightforward. I'm going to assume by this stage that you can sort that fingering out for yourself, okay? And there's nothing particularly difficult there. It's all marked in. What I do want to say a couple of things about is the phrasing and the staccato, because there's quite a lot of phrasing and staccato marks here showing you how to shape the melody line in the right hand. Let's just look at the section right at the start, but then we'll look at a later section as well. So let's just consider the first 2 bars, the first 2 measures to start with in the right hand. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got the smooth notes under the phrases, and at the end of those phrases we've got a staccato note, a detached note played as a bounce, and then a separate one as well. So phrase, bounce, bounce, phrase, bounce, bounce, and then we're into another phrase in bar 3. So we're playing that legato as well. Remember to come on at the end of bar 4, at the end of that phrase, count that final crotchet, that final quarter note, so you're not hanging it on for too long, because we've got that rest at the end of bar 4 in the right hand, and as we know, we're really respecting our rests at the moment. So do watch out for the phrasing and staccato there. Let's look at another example. Let's look at bars 7, 8 and 9, starting with the final half beat of bar 6. Here we go. Okay, that's a really good example at bar 9 there, where I've got the little phrase mark, which is really a slur mark there. I'm going slur it, and then bouncing on the A's. I'm doing the very, very common classical thing there of swapping the fingers. That's a really handy thing to do, because you're more likely to get an even sound on those than if you just play it with a repeated fifth. You could do that, okay, but you're more likely to get an elegant sound if you do this. Yeah, more likely to go wrong as well, but more likely to get an even sound. So once again, we've got the long phrase. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Bounce, bounce, bounce. And there between bars 13 and 14, we've got a phrase break. So we lift off very, very briefly and go on, just so there's kind of a little breath between them. Let me just play bars from bar 12 to the end of the section there, just in the right hand. I really accentuated the gap in the phrase there. Okay, so just watch out for things like that. Then practice the left hand. Notice there is a little bit of phrasing in the left hand as well, nothing like as much. What really matters in the left hand is the timing. Okay, so count it. What I would do actually is count the left hand throughout. So going from the start, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. Okay, and that takes us to bar 5. Kind of get that left hand under your fingers a little bit, and the more you practice that left hand separately, the better I think things are going to work when you put your hands together. The other thing that I really want you to do here is respect the dynamics that I've marked in the piece, okay? One of the problems of playing this style of music is that when you get confident with it, because it's kind of quite exhilarating to play, it can be really tempting just to kind of blast through it, playing everything really loud. And that's kind of satisfying, okay, but it's also difficult to listen to, and it means you lose a lot of the kind of musicality and the sensitivity of the piece. So really respect the dynamic markings. They are not that complicated. Let's just go through some of them now. So we start off F, loud. But then in bar 5 we have a P marking, soft, so straight away there's a contrast. It doesn't have to be super quiet, but just make sure there's a clear difference between this and what's gone before. Okay, then we get to bar 8, and I've put a crescendo hairpin up, underneath this G major scale that we've got. So I have a clear grow up there, from P there to F there. Okay, try to make that reasonably even if you can. That's quite a difficult thing to do, but make it try to give it a reasonably even but quick growth. Then in bar 9 we're back to F. And then bar 12 we've got this kind of broken chord in the right hand. This is a good example where you can kind of vary the dynamic a little bit. We're still within the overall F marking, but you can kind of grow a little bit as you go up the broken chord and then ease off a little bit as you come down the scale like this. So all of that would be F, but you've got the da 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 da. We're not going down to P as such, or even down to MF, but we're varying the dynamic a little bit. So it's not a really rigid F or a really rigid P throughout. Then in bar 16 we get to the second half of the piece, and the character changes. We're straight into a P, a soft section with a much more sustained left hand. Then in bar 20 we've got this F section again, and this should be a real contrast. Yeah, I nearly marked stress marks on the left hand here, because the way you need to think of those two bars is the right hand is the accompaniment and the left hand is the main event. Okay, so really bring out those notes in the left hand. And then back down to P for bar 24. The dynamics vary a bit through the rest of the piece, so we've got a crescendo up to an MF on those, thirds coming down in bar 30, and then up to F again at the end. Then right at the end we're coming down, we're just having a slow decrescendo, well, not a slow decrescendo, a reasonably quick decrescendo actually, in bar 37 to that MP. Yeah, just for a little bit of shaping, okay? But overall, try to respect those dynamics. By all means, make the piece your own, fiddle around with those a little bit, yeah? But respect the broad character of the dynamics I've put in there, because it will make it a more musical piece in general. So like I said, start with the first half of the piece up to the end of bar 15. And when you've got that down to the point where you're beginning to put your hands together, have a look at the second half of the piece as well, okay, and then start considering it as a whole. In the second half of the piece, you will find that most of the problems you come across are very similar to problems, the problems you'll have seen in the first half. Yeah, there's not loads of really different stuff there. There's just a slight change of character in the second half of the piece. Like I said, watch out for the phrasing and the staccato. Make sure you're paying close attention to that. The fingering, it's pretty straightforward throughout. It should all be well within your capabilities, okay? I'm assuming you can deal with that for yourself. If you've got this far in the course, it should not be a problem for you at all. The problem you're going to find here, like I said, is the precision. It's playing the rests as well as the notes. And the way you're going to get that right is by doing lots of separate hand practice and lots of counting. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 off. Yeah, sometimes saying off to yourself when a note should be coming off really, really helps, because it reminds you to pull that G off so that you're not playing it when it shouldn't be played. Yeah, playing the rests in this piece is as important as playing the note. That's a really important thing to understand. So have a play around with this, see how you get on. Keep practicing your scales. In the PDF for this lesson, I've included a reminder list of the scales you need to be working on, and remember you can find the scores for those scales in earlier PDFs in the series, all of them available at billspianopages.com/intermediate. Like I said, check out that Prime Phonic offer I mentioned at the start, because that is a really great deal. It's a really great service. I think you will really like it. And as always, any questions or comments, please get in touch with me. I'm very well aware that the people sticking with this series is kind of a small elite group. Yeah, I'm really glad to have you on board. I know there's not many of you, but I'm really glad to hear from you. And I can easily cope with the questions you're likely to have because of the small numbers. So do get in touch. Do talk to me. As ever, just remember to follow me on social media. Facebook, Twitter and Instagram links are below. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. I can't believe you're not, because probably if you've watched this far you are, but do subscribe to the channel. And also please check out my Patreon page if you're not already a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Bill Hilton, because loads of great stuff there and a really good community we have going on there as well. Okay, so enjoy practicing this Clementi. I'll see you next time.